Hey, life group leaders. I get the joy of sharing our lesson preview again this week. Our lesson today is going to be lesson 12, and it will be a discussion of the entire chapter 2 of Titus. And while it's not a long chapter, there's no way that you're going to be able to discuss the entire chapter, in my opinion. In fact, if I was teaching through it, or preaching through it myself, it would probably take me 3 months, okay? And so you're going to have to make some decisions on how you're going to handle it. If I were teaching this chapter, I would head to verse 11 as fast as I could because I just love that text. That means that verses 1 through 10 would have to be a summary. With that in mind, here's what I think that I might do. I would mention to my students that chapter 2, verse 1 initiates a significant contrast on what Paul had just wrote about the teachers of heresy. In chapter 1, verse 16, Paul clearly points out that they were lip professors, but not life demonstrators. They professed with their mouths, but they denied with their life. And when life does not match Scripture, there is lostness, no matter what the lips may say. So notice with me, here in verse 1, Paul challenges Titus to teach, and he says, teach sound doctrine, and that would be as opposed to what the false heresy teachers were teaching when he closed chapter 1. Now, the challenge is this, that whatever is taught in the church must be uncorrupted. The word sound means healthy, and the word doctrine means teaching. So healthy and accurate Bible makes for a healthy and accurate Christian and church. Now, Paul is a realist. He knows that that would not be easy for Titus, and he knew that Titus would have to confront individuals, but also he knew that stewardship of the church mandates that. And the word you that he uses in verse 1 is not only specific, but it's emphatic. It's an imperative, it's a command. So the idea is he's narrowing his focus on to Titus, and he says, but you. And so there's no options for Titus. If he's going to be a steward of the church, then he's got to deal with this false teaching, the heresy that was being taught in Crete. Now, isn't it interesting how Paul identifies every class of persons in the church? Age, gender, and social position. All of that is included. Now, here's your tension. Are you going to spend your time identifying every group and the specific words that Paul uses there? Now, that's a worthy study. Even though some of the words are very similar, it's a worthy study, but it's going to take a lot of time. Or are you going to be general and then move on to that great text, verses 11 through the end of the chapter? And you're going to have to decide how you're going to treat that. Now, let me give you an example of the richness if you decide to stay in verses 1 through 10. If you look at verse 2, he says the older men are to be temperate, which means sober-minded. They are to be dignified, which means serious about how they live in front of others. And they are to be sensible, which means they are to be disciplined in their desires and impulses. Then Paul gives a summary of these men that will show the means or how they can accomplish that. Now, the word sound in verse 2 is the same word that he uses in verse 1, but it's a participle, which kind of goes like this. You older men are to be, and he'll list those 3 things, while being sound or healthy in faith. That's your relationship with God. In love, which is your relationship with other people, and then perseverance, which is your relationship with yourself, being honest with yourself. And so the thrust of this verse is that unless you are healthy in your relationship with God, unless you're healthy in your relationship to others, and unless you are healthy in your relationship to yourself, then you can't be a sober-minded, serious, disciplined leader of God's church. So if you decide to stay in this section, you have a lot of meat, but frankly, it's going to burn up a lot of your time. It can give you some healthy discussion, and it could very well be that that's where you want to spend your time. Now, for me, what I would do if I was teaching a lesson, man, I'd make a fast track to verses 11 through the end of the chapter, which is verse 15. Now, when you begin reading these verses, I want you to notice the word appearing is used twice in the text. And so that word appearing serves as a bookend to the Christian life. Now, what does appearing mean? Well, the word could be defined as to shine forth. But if you dig out the word, we find that it was used in ancient Greece to describe a hero that would break in and rescue helpless people in danger and distress. And I think, gosh, what a really, really neat description of Christ. He's our hero. He breaks into our lives. He helps us in our danger and our distress. So if we use this section of the lesson, and if we follow our text, what we find is that our hero comes the first time to do some things in the Christian life, but also he'll be coming back a second time to bring the consummation of it. So follow with me for a moment. In verse 11, Paul writes, "The grace of God has given us our hero." And our hero came, and he's coming again. And in this first coming, he comes to rescue us. Grace rescues us from sin. The word salvation means to rescue or deliver. And what a great discussion you can have here about the fundamental truths of salvation. That salvation is all by grace through faith, not according to any merit or works or performance by anybody. We're living in a cultural Christianity society by people thinking that if they're just good or go to church, they're saved. No, you're saved by grace through faith. What a great discussion you could have here. Our hero appeared the first time to save his people, all groups of people, from every tribe and every tongue. Grace rescues us from sin. Secondly, grace also renews. Grace instructs or educates us on how to live rightly in the present world. I believe this is a reference right back to verses 1 through 10. The word for teaching or instructing is a word in the Greek language for child rearing or child education. Man, an illustration would be that school is just starting and our teachers are doing just that with our children, trying to instruct them and teach them some of the very important things in education and, frankly, life for that matter. And so our hero came the first time to save, but also to confront us with what is wrong and what is right. Grace changes our attitudes. Grace changes our actions. And grace even changes our appetites, what we long for or who we desire for. And if we see this not happening in those we love, then we should assume that grace has not impacted them or taught them, which means they are not saved. Because the same grace, the act of God with our hero, the same grace that saves, is also the very same grace that educates. It's all part of the same grace function of our hero. And then number 3, grace rewards. Because Paul says our hero is also coming back a second time. Our hero is the blessed hope that will complete the salvation. Some call it the consummation. We are his possession, and we will be glorified one day. Grace rejoices. While now we might have our challenges, one day all of that will end when our hero returns the second time. That's frankly why I like this particular section, and I think that's probably, if I were teaching, I would camp out on these last verses in the chapter. Just mention the first 10 verses. Now, here, if I were teaching, here's the summary that I probably would give. I would say something like this. This word appearing is the bookends. Between the bookends is the heart of Christianity. And so I would say that the heart of Christianity is the coming of the Son of God into the world as a real man to destroy the works of the devil and to create a new people for his own glory. The center of our faith is that Jesus, our hero, obeyed the will of the Father and obeyed every aspect of the law. Then he died for the sin of his people, rising victorious over death, ascending to the right hand of God, and will come a second time to complete the rescue, the ultimate salvation. Now here's an illustration you may want to use. In 1995, Scott O'Grady, an American pilot, was shot down over the enemy skies of Bosnia. He ejected from his F-16, and for 6 days he hid from the enemy. Sometimes they walked right beside him, he was so close. Now what Scott O'Grady didn't know was that plans were being made for his rescue. When the plans were completed, Admiral Leighton Smith said, "Go get our boy," and he was rescued. It was reported that when he was rescued, he said, "It was as if I were born again." Oh, dear people, in this world, we have our challenges. We must remain true to the Bible because God's got the plan, and the plan's being worked, and it'll be consummated right on time. And so we live for that which is right and befitting of our hero, as well as we confront those who put forth heresy and try to gain advantage over others for their own gain or profit, all the while knowing that our hero, who came as the Savior, will come again as the ultimate judge to deliver his people, all to the glory of God, the Father of grace. Well, you got a challenge. Not a long chapter, but my goodness, what a full chapter. And so as you work through it, make your decision on how you're going to deal with it, how you're going to bring in questions, how you're going to have discussion. But the one thing I think is important is, just like in 1995 when Scott O'Grady was shot down, what he didn't know is that plans were being made for the rescue. You let our people know that God's got the plans and the rescue is on the way, and it'll come right on time, and God will deliver his people. What a great chapter. Hope you have a great time. We had a great kickoff last week, I think, for the fall. Good crowd, good classes, good decisions in our services. We have a baptism coming up. Hopefully we'll have 10 to 12 on that day. That's exciting. And of course, we're needing some help. If you would be willing to encourage, maybe give up one or two of your people to help us in the area of children and youth, we'd appreciate it. They're important, and we need to be able to speak into their lives, just like your life group leaders speak into your life. God bless you.